A 53-year-old electrician spent the night sleeping in his truck in a hospital parking lot, so he wouldn't be late for a job interview the next morning. The hiring director of the largest construction firm in Ontario knew exactly where he was. She had driven past his truck at 6 in the morning and seen the frost on the windows. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She sat in her own car and watched the door of that truck for 20 minutes, waiting to see what kind of man would step out. He didn't know she was there. He didn't know the company he was interviewing with was hers. He didn't know that by the time he walked through those glass doors with a crease ironed into his pants and a thermos of gas station coffee, he would force her to confront something she had spent 11 years trying to forget, and neither of them would leave that building the same. Noelle Arsenault had not built Arsenault Construction into a $380 million company by trusting what people wrote about themselves on paper. She built it by watching what they did when they thought no one was grading them. At 51, she had the kind of stillness that came from surviving things that should have broken her and choosing, quietly, not to let them. Her office on the 14th floor of a glass tower in downtown Hamilton overlooked Lake Ontario on clear days. Today was not a clear day. January in Hamilton did what January always did, settled a gray ceiling over the city and refused to lift it until April. She had come in early that morning to review the final candidate files before the panel interviews began at 9. The role was Site Operations Coordinator for the Niagara Corridor expansion. Not a glamorous title, not an executive position, but the kind of job that held everything together when it needed to be held. Scheduling, subcontractor logistics, municipal compliance windows. If the person in that chair made poor decisions, a $47 million contract could fall 3 weeks behind and take 6 months to recover. Noelle believed in seeing people before she met them. That was the habit she had developed over a decade of hiring and being burned. She visited final candidates' neighborhoods the morning of their interview. Not their homes, just the street. She watched how they left, whether they were hurried or composed, whether they checked their reflection or didn't bother, whether someone dropped them off or they found their own way. She had never interfered, never waved, never offered anything. Her assistant, a woman named Paulette, who had worked with her for 7 years, thought the habit was eccentric. Noelle's board thought it was a liability. One HR consultant had called it, gently but directly, a practice that opens significant legal exposure. Noelle had thanked him for his time and continued doing it anyway. That morning, the address in the file read, Lot C, Hamilton General Hospital, Aberdeen Avenue. No fixed address listed. Emergency contact, none. She had sat with that for a moment before she drove there. The truck was a 2009 Ford F-150, dark green, the rear panel replaced with a different shade that had never been repainted to match. It was parked in the far corner of Lot C, away from the entrance lights, the kind of parking choice that said the person inside had thought about not being noticed. The windows were fogged from inside. A thin line of frost had gathered at the bottom edge of the windshield. Noelle pulled her Audi into a spot 30 meters away, cut the engine, and waited. At 6:47, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, work-worn hands, gray at his temples. He was wearing dark trousers with a crease that had been pressed carefully into them, the kind of crease that required effort without an ironing board, a dress shirt the color of pale blue sky, and a tie he was adjusting as he stood in the cold. He reached back into the cab, pulled out a small bag, walked to the side mirror, and used it to check his collar. Straightened the tie twice. Then he looked up, assessed the sky the way people who work outside learn to assess weather, not with dread, just information, and started walking toward the hospital entrance, not inside, toward the public washroom near the main lobby entrance, the one that stayed unlocked all night. He was gone 12 minutes. When he came back out, his hair was combed. His shoes, steel-toed boots that he had polished until they held a dull shine, were clean. He carried the bag back to the truck, locked it, and then stood for a moment with one hand resting on the door panel. Not hesitating, just still, The way someone is still when they are gathering something from inside themselves before they walk into something hard. Then he straightened his shoulders and walked east toward the bus stop on King Street. Noelle watched him until he was out of sight. Then she sat in her car for another 4 minutes before she started the engine. She did not offer him a ride. Owen Bryce Callahan had been a licensed journeyman electrician for 22 years. He had wired commercial buildings from Sudbury to Windsor. He had worked on 3 hospital expansions and 1 casino floor. He had never been late to a job site. He had never left a site with open work. He had a safety record that had not produced a single incident report in 2 decades, and he had a reference letter from a foreman named Gord McPhee that said, plainly, in the way that Gord said everything, "If Owen Callahan tells you something is done, it's done right, and it's done safe. I have trusted this man with my crew for 11 years. That letter was folded in the breast pocket of his dress shirt, along with 2 others and a printed copy of the job posting he had found on the Arsenault construction website at 11:30 on a Tuesday night in November. He had not slept well that night. He rarely did anymore. 18 months earlier, Owen had been doing fine. Not rich. Not comfortable in the way that word gets used loosely, but fine. Steady union work, a rental house in Brantford, his daughter Piper in her 2nd year at Mohawk College studying nursing. His wife Donna had died 4 years before, breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and the grief of that had changed the shape of everything. But Owen was a man who had learned to carry weight without letting it change his gait, and he had been managing. Then the union local he had worked through for 19 years shut down. Not a strike, not a scandal. The local folded when 3 of its largest commercial contracts went to non-union firms underbidding by margins the union couldn't match. 47 journeymen out of regular rotation overnight. Owen spent 6 weeks on the out-of-work list. Found a short-term contract through a different local, but the work dried up in October when the developer pulled financing. He found another contract. That one lasted 8 weeks. Then a third, which fell apart when the site supervisor and the general contractor had a dispute that had nothing to do with Owen and everything to do with a man named Kevin Doyle who had never once in his professional life said, "I don't know," when he should have. 14 months, 3 contracts, 7 weeks of employment insurance. His savings, a modest amount, the kind built slowly by someone who had put a child through 2 years of college and buried a spouse in the same decade, had been spent by September. His rental agreement ended October 31st. His landlord was not a villain. He simply had a nephew who needed the place. Owen had not told Piper. She was doing well. She didn't need to carry his problems. She had enough to manage with her own tuition and her part-time shifts at a pharmacy on Upper James Street. He spent November in a friend's spare room. The friend's wife was kind about it for the first 3 weeks. After that, kindness became quiet strain, and Owen recognized the sound of it. He moved into the truck on December 4th. He had a gym membership, a basic one, $12 a month, that gave him access to showers. He had a phone plan that he had downgraded twice and paid with the last of a line of credit he had never used before in his life. He had a small camping stove, a cooler, and the discipline to eat cheaply without letting it become an excuse to stop eating. He applied for 41 positions between October and January. Electrical supervisor roles, site coordinator positions, 2 project manager postings he was technically underqualified for, but applied to anyway on the principle that the worst answer was no. Most applications received automated replies. 11 received silence. 4 led to first-round interviews. 2 of those led to second rounds. Both second rounds ended the same way, a polite email thanking him for his time. This morning was the first third-round interview he had received. Arsenault Construction, Site Operations Coordinator, Niagara Corridor, salary posted, $74,000, benefits included after 90 days. It was not the job he had done most of his career. It was a desk-adjacent role, more logistics than technical, more management than tools. But Owen had spent 2 decades coordinating subcontractors on large sites. He knew scheduling software. He knew how to read a municipal compliance window. He knew, from experience, what happened when the electrical rough-in fell behind and the drywaller showed up anyway. He knew what things cost when they went wrong. He had prepared for 3 weeks. He had downloaded Arsenault's last 2 annual reports from their website. He had studied the Niagara Corridor project description in a public infrastructure planning document he found on the Region of Niagara's website. He had handwritten notes on a legal pad that he reviewed each night in the front seat of his truck, the interior light on, temperature dropping outside. The bus he needed left at 7:22 from King and Sherman. He walked there in 16 minutes, paid with a Presto card that had $4.60 left on it. The fare was $3.50. He had 90 cents left when he boarded. The bus moved through downtown Hamilton. Owen sat near the back and reviewed his notes one last time. His hands were steady. His stomach was not, but that was manageable. He had learned a long time ago that nerves were just the body preparing to do something that mattered. You acknowledge them and then you set them aside, the way you set aside everything that wasn't the job in front of you. He got off at James and Main, walked 4 blocks north in the cold, pushed through the revolving door of Arsenault's building at 8:41. 18 minutes early. The lobby was tall and warm. A young woman at the reception desk looked up and smiled with the kind of professional warmth that was practiced but not unkind. Owen approached, gave his name, explained he was there for a 9 o'clock interview. The woman, her name tag read Celeste, asked him to have a seat and offered him water. He thanked her. He sat in a chair that faced the entrance, not because he was watching for anything, just because sitting with your back to a room was a habit he had broken himself of early in his career. You watched the room. You learned the room. It told you things. 3 other candidates arrived over the next 15 minutes. A young woman in a fitted blazer with a leather portfolio. A man about 40 in a suit jacket over a sweater, radiating the particular confidence of someone who had not spent the last 6 weeks reviewing his bank balance every morning. A second woman, late 30s, who checked her phone twice before sitting. They were all dry. They had all arrived from somewhere warm. Owen did not feel sorry for himself. That was not useful. What he noticed, instead, was that none of them had a copy of the project brief. He had printed his from the Region of Niagara's website. It was in the folder on his lap, tabbed, with handwritten notes in the margins. He could not be certain what they had prepared, but he could see what they were holding. At 8:53, Celeste walked over with a paper cup. She handed it to Owen specifically, not to anyone else in the waiting area. "Someone asked me to bring this to you," she said. "Coffee. Double-double, I was told." Owen looked at the cup, then at Celeste. "Who?" "I honestly don't know," she said. "I was just asked to make sure you got it." He held the cup in both hands. The warmth moved through his palms in a way he had not expected to feel in a public building, among strangers, before an interview for a job he was not certain he would get. He said thank you in a voice that came out quieter than he intended. He didn't drink it right away, he just held it. The man in the suit jacket noticed. Owen saw the glance, brief then away. No comment. That was something. His name was called at 9:07, first of the 4. The room was a standard boardroom, rectangular table, 4 chairs on the far side, one on his. A glass of water already poured. Beside it, a notepad and a pen. 2 people sat across from him. Keith Warden, VP of Operations, mid-50s, a man whose hands told you he had worked sites before he managed them. Beside him, Lauren Chartrand, HR Director, early 40s, the kind of person who asked questions she already knew the answer to in order to see how you handled yourself. Between them, an empty chair. Owen noticed it. Said nothing. The interview opened with the standard sequence. Walk us through your background. Tell us about your experience with scheduling on large commercial builds. What project management software have you used? How do you handle a subcontractor who is behind and won't commit to a recovery date? Owen answered each one directly. He did not perform. He did not manage his answers toward what he imagined they wanted to hear. He said what he knew and acknowledged clearly the 1 or 2 areas where he had less direct experience and explained what he had done to address them. Keith's pen moved. Lauren watched his face. Then Keith looked up. Mr. Callahan, your work history is strong on the technical side, but this role is a significant shift. You've spent 22 years on tools and on site. This position requires coordinating across 4 regional offices simultaneously, managing vendor relationships you won't always be able to visit in person. There's a gap between what you've done and what we need. He paused. Why should we believe you can make that transition? Owen's hands were flat on the table. He looked at Keith for a moment before he answered. Because I have been coordinating across gaps my entire career, not across offices, across the difference between what a plan says and what a site actually does. I have managed subcontractors who were behind schedule and wouldn't admit it. I have tracked compliance windows on 4 simultaneous permit applications while running a crew. I have been the person who read the whole project and knew which part was about to fail 2 weeks before anyone else did. He paused. The tools are different in this role. The software, the reporting structure, the vendor relationships, those I can learn. I have proven that I learn job-specific systems quickly. What I cannot manufacture is 22 years of understanding why a project falls apart and exactly where in the sequence it starts. He let that sit for a moment. I also slept in my truck last night, he said, in the hospital parking lot on Aberdeen, because I did not have anywhere else to sleep and I was not going to risk being late to this interview. I'm telling you that not for sympathy. I'm telling you because you asked what would make you believe I'm serious about making this transition. The room was quiet. Lauren's pen had stopped moving. Keith was looking at him with an expression that was not pity and not embarrassment. It was something older than both of those. Recognition, maybe, the kind that comes from having once stood somewhere close to where another person is standing. Then the door opened. Owen heard it before he turned. The soft mechanical sound of a handle, the change in air pressure, footsteps that were unhurried in the particular way of someone who was never in a hurry because the room adjusted to them, not the other way around. A woman walked in, late 40s or early 50s. Dark blazer, no jewelry except a watch, silver hair worn short and practical. She carried nothing. She sat in the empty chair, adjusted it slightly toward the table, and looked at Owen without any of the preamble that might have made the moment easier. Keith straightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Arsenault, we weren't expecting you. I know, she said. Nothing else. She studied Owen for several seconds. He held her gaze, not defiantly, just steadily, the way you learn to hold eye contact with people who are trying to decide something about you. Noelle Arsenault. He recognized the name from the letterhead on the job posting. The company was hers. The building had her name on it. I have one question, she said. Owen waited. You listed the hospital parking lot as your address on the application. That was not a mistake, was it? It was not a question, quite. But he answered it as one. No, he said, it wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you find somewhere else? A shelter. A friend. I had used the friends I had available to me, and I wasn't prepared to walk into this interview explaining that I had spent the previous night in a shelter. Not because I am ashamed of it, because I wasn't going to carry that into the room and ask you to see past it. He paused. The parking lot was quiet. I had what I needed. And I was there. Noelle Arsenault did not nod, did not smile, did not show him whatever she was thinking. She turned to Lauren and Keith, said, "Give me a few minutes," and waited until they left the room. Owen did not know what was coming. He held himself the same way he had held himself all morning. Still, present. Not asking for anything he hadn't been offered. She folded her hands on the table. My father worked electrical, she said. 29 years. He never told us when things were hard. He fixed it quietly and showed up. That was his whole philosophy. She looked at Owen. I watched you leave that parking lot this morning. I was there. Owen absorbed that without moving. I sat in my car and I watched you. I didn't stop you. I didn't offer you a ride. I let you get on that bus in January. Her voice was level, but there was something beneath it. I'm telling you that because you were honest with me, and you deserve to know that I was watching. Owen said nothing for a moment. Then, did I pass? Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, but close to one. You didn't know anyone was watching, she said. That's exactly the point. The deliberation happened in Noelle's office on the 14th floor. Keith and Lauren sat across from her. The view was gray. Lake Ontario was invisible beneath cloud. Keith spoke first. He's technically underqualified. No formal project management credentials. The gap between site-level coordination and regional multi-office management is real. His analysis of the compliance window situation in the Niagara document was more detailed than anything the other three candidates offered. Lauren said quietly. He didn't have the document. It wasn't in the briefing package. No, Lauren said. He found it himself. Keith said nothing. Noelle stood at the window with her back to both of them. He pressed his trousers in a truck, she said. He walked into a hospital lobby with a wash bag and came out groomed for a professional interview. He held a cup of coffee like it was the first warm thing he'd touched in a month, and he still answered every question with his eyes up. She turned around. We're not hiring him because his situation is difficult. We're hiring him because he did everything right under conditions none of the other candidates faced. That's not sentiment. That is an operational assessment. Keith looked at her for a long moment. 90-day probation, he said. Standard terms, full expectations. Same as anyone, Noelle said. Owen Callahan started at Arsenault Construction on a Tuesday. He arrived 45 minutes early. He had found a basement room in a boarding house on Barton Street, $380 a month. Shared kitchen, radiator that worked. Piper had called him the Sunday before to say she had noticed he wasn't answering her questions about the Brantford house directly. He had told her then. All of it. She had gone quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he said, "Because you were doing well. I didn't want to stop that." She came over that Sunday. She helped him move in. She brought soup and said very little, which was how the Calligans handled things that were too large for words. The first weeks were disorienting in the ordinary way of new work, new systems, new names, new rhythms. The project management software was called Procore, and he had 3 days of training that he supplemented with tutorial videos on his phone each evening until he understood it well enough to stop relying on the cheat sheet he had taped to the inside of his desk drawer. He made mistakes. A scheduling conflict he missed between 2 subcontractors on the Grimsby site. A vendor callback he logged in the wrong project file. He corrected both before they caused downstream damage. He reported them to his team lead, a steady woman named Adrienne, who had been with Arsenault for 11 years before anyone else noticed. "You're not the first person to make those mistakes," Adrienne told him. "I know," he said, "but I'd rather be the person who catches them than the person who waits to see if they get caught." By week 5, something changed. He was reviewing the subcontractor timeline for the St. Catharines phase when he noticed that the electrical rough-in schedule and the insulation delivery window were overlapping by 4 days in the 3rd week of March. On a standard build, this was manageable. On this particular site, the building had a partial basement with access through a single service corridor. 2 crews working simultaneously in that corridor during that window would create a bottleneck that the current schedule did not account for. He pulled the site drawings from the shared drive, cross-referenced the municipal permit expiry dates, ran the numbers on crew hours. The overlap was not dramatic. It would not have caused a catastrophic delay. It would have caused 3 days of inefficiency that would have cascaded through April, pushing the drywall start, which would push the inspection request, which would push the certificate of occupancy. And on a contract where the client had a penalty clause for late handover, 3 days in March could become $15,000 in April. He brought it to Adrienne with a 1-page summary, a revised timeline, and 2 alternative sequencing options. She read it twice. She forwarded it to Keith. Keith called Owen into his office that afternoon. "How long did this take you?" "About 2 hours, Owen said. "I noticed it while I was doing something else." Keith looked at him. "In 22 years on sites?" "When you're running a crew," Owen said, "you learn to see where things are about to go sideways. You develop a kind of peripheral vision for it. I think I was just applying that to a different view. The timeline was adjusted. The bottleneck was avoided. There was no cascade. There was no penalty, Adrian told him afterward, quietly, in the kitchen. Keith doesn't usually say this kind of thing, but he mentioned to me that the catch was worth more than you make in a month. Owen nodded. Then maybe we revisit that in 3 months, he said. And Adrian laughed. Genuinely, not politely, for the first time since he had started. Day 90 arrived on a Thursday morning. Keith's evaluation was thorough and clinical. 3 pages. Attendance, perfect. Technical accuracy, above expectations. Initiative exceeds. Peer assessment, strong. He had made 2 documented errors, both self-reported, both corrected before impact. At the bottom of the last page, Keith had written, in handwriting that was precise and slightly old-fashioned, full employment recommended, no conditions. Owen read it in the chair across from Keith's desk. He read it twice. Then he thanked Keith, shook his hand, and walked back to his workstation. He sat down, put his hands flat on the desk, and looked at the window for 30 seconds. He had a job. A real one. With his name on a contract and benefits starting the following month and a salary that would cover the Barton Street room and Piper's remaining tuition and groceries, and, eventually, a deposit on something better. He did not cry. He was not that kind of man, or he had not been for a long time. But there was a release in his chest that he recognized as the sound something makes when it has been held under pressure for too long and is finally allowed to move. That evening, he called Piper. She already knew. Adrian had texted her, apparently, because Adrian was that kind of person and Owen had made the mistake of mentioning her name once. Piper picked up on the first ring and said simply, "There it is, Dad." And he said, "There it is." And that was all they needed. The trouble came 6 weeks after the probation ended. His name was Stuart Pembroke. Senior Project Director, 12 years with Arsenault, 3 commendations on his personnel file, and a reputation for being precise in ways that were useful and unforgiving in ways that occasionally were not. Stuart believed in process. He believed in documentation. He believed in measurable, verifiable data. He did not believe in exceptions. During a routine review of new hire background assessments, Stuart found 2 things. The first, Owen's credit history, which showed a debt consolidation from 18 months prior and a period of missed rental payments ending the previous October. The second, his listed address at time of hire, which, when Stuart looked it up, was a hospital parking lot. Stuart raised it in a project director's meeting. Not with hostility, with the flat precision of a man who thought he was doing his job. "We have given regional operations access to someone whose financial background reflects significant recent instability," he said. "I'm not challenging his performance. I'm raising the question of whether this hire was consistent with our risk assessment standards." The room was quiet. One of the other directors, a woman named Yvonne, who had been with Arsenault for 7 years, said carefully, "His catch on the St. Catherine sequence saved us 3 days and a penalty clause. That is also measurable." Stuart paused. "One good outcome does not erase a risk profile. Neither does a difficult year erase 22 years of clean work," Yvonne replied. Stuart did not back down, but the conversation ended there. Owen heard about it indirectly, the way these things always travel in companies, through a half-heard exchange and a colleague's careful non-answer when he asked about something unrelated. He did not know Stuart's name. He did not know what had been said specifically. He knew that something was moving through the building that was connected to him, and that it was not complimentary. He went home that evening to the Barton Street room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about quitting. It was a serious thought, not impulsive. He examined it the way he examined a floor plan, looking at it from every angle before deciding what was structural and what was decorative. He could find another contract. It would be easier now that he had Arsenault on his resume and Keith's signature on a performance review. He could leave before whatever was moving through the building reached him in any formal way. He could protect himself by leaving on his own terms. Then he put the thought down. He had spent 22 years finishing what he started. He was not going to stop because someone he had never met had found his credit history and confused it with his character. He opened his laptop, pulled up the Procore dashboard, and spent 2 hours reviewing the next month's scheduling reports. He was still there when the system flagged a conflict in the Welland site file he had never been assigned to. Arsenault Construction had a contract with a municipal housing development in Welland that had been experiencing unexplained cost overruns for 3 months. Stuart Pembroke had managed the account directly and thrown 2 additional supervisors at it without resolution. The client, a regional housing authority, had sent a formal notice at the end of January: resolve the overruns within 60 days or face a formal audit that would almost certainly result in contract suspension. 60 days. Approximately $41 million of work. The flag Owen had found was a discrepancy in the materials delivery invoicing, a double billing pattern across 3 supplier accounts that appeared in the Welland files when cross-referenced against the central procurement log. Not fraud. The system allowed it because no one had built in a cross-project check, but it meant the same delivery was being invoiced against 2 cost centers simultaneously, inflating the reported costs on the Welland site by an amount that, over 3 months, had added up to slightly over $200,000 in phantom overruns. He wrote a 4-page summary. Clean. Direct. He cross-referenced every figure with the invoice numbers and document dates. He explained why the system allowed it and how it could be corrected. He proposed a reconciliation process that could be implemented in 2 weeks. He sent it to Adrian at 11:47 at night with a single line: "I wasn't looking for this, but I found it. Please tell me if I've overstepped." Adrian forwarded it to Noelle. Noelle read it at 6:15 the following morning. She read it again. She called Keith. At 9 o'clock, Noelle walked into the second-floor open office, where Owen sat with a coffee that had gone cold, cross-referencing something in a spreadsheet. She stood at the edge of his workstation until he looked up. "Come up to 12, she said. The Welland Housing Authority had sent their formal notice 21 days earlier. Arsenault had 19 days remaining. The resolution meeting included Noelle, Keith, the Welland project manager, and a representative from the housing authority who had driven in from Welland expressly to hear what Arsenault was proposing. Owen was asked to present his findings. He stood at the front of the room and explained the billing discrepancy, the cross-referencing gap, the reconciliation process, and the corrected project cost projection, which, once the phantom overruns were removed, put the Welland contract within its original budget estimate. He spoke for 18 minutes. He did not use jargon he wasn't certain about. He did not overstate. He answered 3 questions from the housing authority representative with the same directness he used for everything, including the one question that was almost a challenge. Why did it take this long for someone to find this? Because the system wasn't built to catch it, Owen said, and no one was looking across both files at the same time. I was reviewing scheduling data for a separate project. I found it by accident, which is also why I want to recommend a cross-project audit process going forward so that the next one isn't found by accident. The housing authority representative looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Noelle. "Is this your person?" he asked. "He is now," Noelle said. Stuart Pembroke did not attend the Welland meeting. Owen never knew exactly what happened after that. He was not a man who spent energy on information he hadn't been given directly. What he knew was that 3 weeks later, Stuart was moved to a reduced oversight role in a different division, and that the reassignment was described internally as a restructuring of responsibilities. Yvonne told him that, quietly, over coffee. Nothing more. Owen did not celebrate. But he noted he was promoted 11 months after his start date. Operations Manager, South Central Division. His office was on the 7th floor, a window facing south, Lake Ontario visible on the clear days that came in April and June. On the bookshelf behind his desk, he kept 3 things: his journeyman certification, a photo of Piper at her nursing pinning ceremony, June, 2nd row, her face lit up the way faces are lit up when they have worked for something long enough to know what it cost, and a parking pass for Hamilton General Hospital, Lot C, the one that had been in the visor of his truck on Aberdeen Avenue on that January morning when the windows were fogged and the frost was on the glass. And a woman had sat 30 meters away in an Audi and watched and chosen not to knock. He kept the parking pass because it reminded him that the hardest night he had spent was also the one that led to everything after it, not because suffering is redemptive. He didn't believe that, or not simply, but because on that night he had made a choice to prepare anyway, to press his trousers anyway, to show up anyway, and that choice had not gone unnoticed, even when he thought no one was watching. Noelle Arsenault changed things, slowly and without announcement, the way she did most things. The first change was a policy update she pushed through the following year. Candidates were no longer assessed on credit history or background financial checks for non-financial roles. The HR team replaced the financial screening requirement with a structured reference check, specifically designed to assess reliability and professional accountability over time. The second change was a program she launched 18 months after Owen was hired. She called it the Bridgepoint Hiring Initiative. It was not named for anything geographical. She did not explain the name publicly. The program established a dedicated pipeline for candidates who had experienced employment gaps, housing instability, or labor market displacement. It included subsidized transit passes for the first 60 days, a 3-month housing support partnership with 2 Hamilton social service agencies, structured mentorship pairing with senior staff, and a hiring assessment framework that demonstrated resilience and transferable skills alongside traditional credentials. In the first year, 29 people were hired through the program. 24 were still employed at the 12-month mark. 18 had received at least one performance review rated above expectations. 9 had been promoted. On the wall of the Bridgepoint program office on the 2nd floor in a small glass frame was a single item, a laminated parking ticket. Hamilton General Hospital, Lot C, issued January 14th at 6:43 in the morning to a dark green 2009 Ford F-150. Most people who walked past it assumed it was a joke, or some kind of inside reference they weren't in on. It was not a joke. Owen had given it to Noelle at the end of his first year without ceremony, in an envelope left on her assistant Paulette's desk with a note that said only, "In case you need a reminder of what you saw that morning." "I do." Noelle had read the note, placed it in a drawer, and had the ticket framed by the end of the week. She never mentioned it to Owen directly. He never asked if she had received it. Some things between two people don't require confirmation. They exist in the space between what was done and what was understood, and that space is enough. 2 winters later, Owen was driving home on a Tuesday evening when the snow came sideways off the lake the way it did in Hamilton when the wind turned west. The kind of snow that came in sheets and made the streetlights look like they were underwater. He was on Barton, heading east, out of habit even though he no longer lived there. He saw the car first, an older Honda Fit, hazard lights on, pulled half onto the curb. Then he saw the woman, 50s, heavy coat, a folder held against her chest with both arms. The kind of hold that meant what was inside mattered more than what was outside. She was looking at her phone. He could see from the slant of her face that she was on a call, and from the stillness of her feet that she had stopped moving. He pulled over, put the four-ways on, rolled down the passenger window. She looked up, startled, cautious. "Car, trouble," he said. "Battery," she said. I have an interview. Downtown. I don't know if I can still." She checked watch. It was 6:51. "Get in," he said. "I know where it is." She stood in the snow for 2 seconds, assessing him. The truck, the four-ways, the steady voice of a man who was not trying to be anything other than what he was saying he was. She got in. Owen pulled back into traffic. The wipers worked against the snow. The heater came on. Neither of them said anything for a block. Then she said, "I haven't had a lot of people just—" She stopped. "You don't have to explain," he said. She held the folder on her lap. Her hands were still cold. He could see it in the way she was pressing them together. "What's the interview for?" he asked. "Operations coordinator. she said. It's a logistics firm on James North. I haven't worked in 14 months. I know that looks. It looks like 14 months, Owen said. That's all it looks like. She didn't answer for a moment. What do you do? She asked. I manage construction operations for a regional firm, he said. And then, because it was true, and because she needed to hear it more than he needed to stay private. 14 months ago, I was sleeping in a parking lot on Aberdeen Avenue. She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. I'm not telling you that to make you feel better, he said. I'm telling you because it's true, and because the person who hired me had been watching since 6 in the morning, and I didn't know that either. All I did was show up. He pulled up to the building on James North at 7:03. She had 6 minutes. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. Thank you, she said. The word came out with more weight than 2 syllables usually carry. Straighten your collar, he said. You've got this. She got out, pulled her folder tighter against her chest, walked through the front door without looking back, shoulders straight, head up. Owen sat at the curb for a moment. The snow came down. The hazards of the Honda Fit were still blinking 6 blocks back. He thought about a parking lot in January, about a thermos of gas station coffee, about a cup that arrived on a reception desk without explanation, about what it cost to walk into a room and tell the truth about where you slept and what it meant that someone had already been watching. He thought about Noelle Arsenault in her Audi on Aberdeen Avenue, 30 meters from his truck, sitting in the dark with the engine off, choosing not to knock. He understood now, in the way you only understand things by being on the other side of them, why she hadn't. Not because it was right, not because it was kind, but because she had needed to see what he would do when he believed no one was there. And the answer he had given her, getting up, pressing his trousers, combing his hair in a hospital mirror, buying a bus fare with 90 cents remaining on a card, had been truer than anything he could have told her in an interview room. Still, he had made a different choice tonight. He pulled back into traffic and headed home through the snow, and he did not regret it. Some things you carry through your whole life because they made you, and some things you put down, gently, on behalf of someone else. And knowing the difference between those two kinds of things was, Owen had come to believe, the closest thing he had found to wisdom. The snow kept falling, the city kept moving, and somewhere on James Street North, a woman with a folder full of documents and 14 months of silence behind her was walking into a room and beginning to tell someone who she was. He hoped they were listening.